far as the eye could see, I see people. Glory to Jesus Christ. Good morning. Let me tell you why I'm here. They told me that I have 5 minutes to come up here and tell you guys about myself. And the reason I have to do that is because I'm giving 2 talks later on today, and I think the organizers here just want everyone here to be up to speed on me because I'm the least famous person here that's speaking. So they need to get me out of the way to make sure everyone knows who I am. My name is Alejandro. You can call me Alex. Some of you might know me online as Voice of Reason. I am the voice of reason. And I've met some of you already, and thank you to everyone that has come up to me. You guys have been so nice. Every single person that has come up to me today has said, "You killed James White, man." That's what they keep telling me, because I had the debate. Who here was here for that debate? I was here back in July. I debated James White, and everyone has just, they don't care about anything else that I've done. That was like the only thing they care about is that I debated James White. So when I was right at the end, right before I turned 15, I became obsessed. And when I say obsessed, I mean obsessed. Maybe an unhealthy obsession, I don't know. I became obsessed with learning everything that I could about this man, Jesus Christ. I wanted to learn everything that I could about him, everything. I want to learn everything about him. What did he tell us? What did he speak? What were his lessons that he wants us to know? What did he give to us? I wanted to learn everything about his church. I became obsessed. And to this day, I am obsessed with our Lord Jesus Christ. And today, the goal is for all of you, for all of us, to leave here and be absolutely obsessed. And that's what we're here to do. So I was around 15 years old. I became obsessed. I was confirmed when I was 16 years old. And I was so obsessed that they put me in charge of everything at my local parish. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I was in charge of teaching all of the adults. So I was a 16-year-old kid, and I was running the adult faith formation program at my parish, and I was teaching all of the adults because I was obsessed, and I'm what they call, I guess, like a teenage prodigy, I guess, and I like know my stuff. So they said, "You're gonna teach everybody else." And then I started going all around the archdiocese teaching everybody else. And then my best friend, since kindergarten, my best friend in the world, his name is Jonathan. He's in another room right now. He told me, he said, "Hey, you know what you should do?" I said, "What should I do, Jonathan?" He said, "You should let me record you and film you talking about the stuff that you know, and you should let me put it online. And I promise you, if you allow me to do this, everyone in the world is going to know who you are, because I think that you have something to say, something that the entire world needs to know." And I said, "No." I said, "I'm all right." I said, "I'm not into that social media stuff, man. I'm all right. I'm cool." And I said no for like about a year, maybe a year and a half. He tried to convince me to do an online ministry. I was very happy. I was very, very happy being a catechist at the local level, you know, in my archdiocese, and just going from parish to parish and just teaching everybody, you know, teenagers, adults, everyone. And then something really interesting happened. See, God will always have his way. Will always have his way. And when you think that you know better, God is going to laugh at you, and he's going to make sure that he puts you where he needs you to be. So all of a sudden, I don't know what happened, all of these parishes where I used to work, where I used to be a catechist, they said, "You know what? Voice of Reason." I wasn't called Voice of Reason yet, but in my mind, that's what everyone calls me. So they said, "Voice." They said, "Voice, we don't need you anymore." They said, "We don't need you anymore." And I was done, and I stopped teaching at the local level as a catechist. For some reason, I don't know what happened. I think it was an act of God. It said, "We don't need you anymore." And I was a little bummed out because I wasn't needed, and it doesn't feel good to not be needed. And then Jonathan said, "See, they don't want you, I want you." He said, and he just came over to my house one day. I don't even know how he got inside. He just came in. He had his cameras, he had his setup. He set up, and he said, "You sit on the couch, sit right there, shut up, and you do what I say." And he set up all of his equipment, and then he looks at me, and I'm sitting there on my couch, and he says, "Talk about this," whatever would come to his mind. And then I would just start talking. And he filmed me, and we had a whole, hour-long session where I'm just talking about whatever it is that he wanted me to talk about. And then a couple of days later, he sent me these links, and he said, "Look, here is your video, and this is what you can be. This is what I can do for you, and we can put you out there. So Jonathan, he's actually my godson too. He got confirmed a few years ago, and I'm his sponsor for confirmation, and he became obsessed. He became obsessed with Jesus Christ become of me, and he became so obsessed that he wanted to use his talents to help me teach the world what I taught him. He became obsessed. He didn't care about the faith. He didn't care about the faith at all. It wasn't until just being his friend and talking to him that he was so convicted and he became obsessed and he fell in love. He got confirmed. I'm his godfather. And now he made me the voice of reason. So I've made quite a few people in my life obsessed. And I would like to make every single one of you obsessed as well. If you want to get obsessed, you can follow me on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at voiceofreason_clips. And share it with the world. Many of you have already, I've had young men come up to me today and say, you know what, I'm just joining the priesthood because of you. I've only been Voice of Reason since March of last year. It's been only about a year and a half. And I cannot tell you, literally thousands and thousands and thousands of young people, and old people too, that have reached out to me to say, you changed my life. Just because I'm obsessed. And I want to tell the whole world about our Lord Jesus Christ. And that's what we are here to do today. And the very first person that is going to tell us about just exactly how we are supposed to make the world obsessed with Jesus Christ, with the faith, and with living a life of virtue is none other than the great Brian Holdsworth. And I don't know if I need to introduce him or if you guys have an introduction for him. Brian, I'm sorry, my friend. I don't have anything written down here for how you want to be introduced, but Brian Holdsworth is another one of these obsessed individuals who loves Jesus Christ, and he also has an online ministry. If you Google Brian Holdsworth, or if you look him up on YouTube, his channel will pop up. Let me tell you guys, Brian Holdsworth has a perspective that is so unique, and this man knows exactly what we need to do to win the culture over for Jesus Christ. So without further ado, please help me welcome the great Brian Holdsworth.
Thank you very much. Give it up for Alex and Rob too, yeah. Word of advice for the organizers, don't find an MC who's more dynamic than the keynote speaker. I feel like I'm going to be strained to keep that momentum and energy going up here. I study computer programming as well, like he had mentioned, and I'm actually a typical like programmer where I'm just sort of melancholic and reserved, and I hide in my cave all day. So I'll do my best here. Hopefully we can make this worthwhile. I do want to say thank you, first of all, for inviting me down here. I live about 1,000 miles northwest of here, and I don't do this very often. I don't do a lot of speaking gigs, so I really relish the opportunity to come down to enjoy the seasonal relief and balmy weather of the United States. But this actually does feel pretty typical from where I come from. So I know some of you guys are, this was a challenge getting out here, so congratulations to you few, or I hope you're the majority that were actually able to make it. With that said, though, it's kind of hard being a speaker at events like this because, you know, I've got hundreds of videos on my YouTube channel, and I've got folders full of ideas and things that I want to talk to people about. And, you know, I get an invitation and they say, okay, you've got half an hour to do a keynote presentation. And I'm thinking, half an hour, all the topics that I want to address for you, and I've only got half an hour. It's sort of like being a mosquito on a nude beach, where I'm just sort of like, where do I begin? There's so much potential here. So it's not a lot of time. I don't have a lot of time to waste, so I'm just gonna try and jump right into it and probably stick closer to my notes than I normally would here. So as men, and as disciples of the Lord, we want to be good men, right? We want to be strong men. But in order to do so, we have to have a clear understanding of who we are as men and as human beings. Aristotle and Socrates didn't always agree on a lot of things, but they did agree on this one thing. They said that the beginning of wisdom is self-knowledge. Now, they didn't have revelation, they didn't have the Bible, so we can forgive them for not knowing that the beginning of wisdom is actually fear of the Lord, as the Bible says. But, just based on the natural gifts of reason, that's a pretty good answer. So, based on that, I want you to take a moment to answer this question yourself. Just internally, you don't have to blurt anything out, but just answer this question: who are you? Which, it's kind of a silly question because it's not an uncommon question. This gets asked all the time in polite society, and we answer this question assuming that people want to know, that they're either asking this question implicitly or explicitly. So I might say, "Hi, I'm Brian, nice to meet you," right? And then you might respond accordingly. But does that fully satisfy the question? So let me ask a follow-up. Is there anybody here who is also named Brian? You could just raise your hand if you are, if you're not too embarrassed to admit that. Yeah. I feel you. I feel your pain having to journey through life with this generic vanilla name. But okay, but wait a minute. So for those of you for those who answered yes to that question, if when I answer the question, who am I say Brian, and they answer the question the same way, does that mean that we're the same person? Obviously, that's a ridiculous proposition. Our intuitions would automatically reject that. But if we're trying to answer this question rationally and to combine our intuition with our reason, there seems to be a problem there. So we obviously haven't fully satisfied that question. Brian is just a word that I use to describe myself or to reference myself. So maybe there's another way. Maybe you could refer to yourself. You could point to yourself and say, look at me, this is who I am. Enjoy the splendor of my physical form, right? So, okay, you're a body, you're a physical form extended in space and time. But does that comprehensively answer the question? Is that even how you think about yourself? Do you refer to yourself as your body? If you wanted to get together with some of your friends, maybe from one of your core groups, would you text them or call them up and say, hey, you crazy guy, my body's feeling lonely. Get your body over here. My body wants to hang out with your body. I hope not. You're going to plummet in numbers with your core group if you do that. If you're sick and you can't go into work or go into school, do you call your boss and say, body's not feeling good, body's going to stay home? No, you say, I'm feeling sick, I can't come into work today. Well, what does the I in that phrase mean? And isn't this kind of frustrating? Like, this is, again, one of the most intuitive, obvious questions that we ask and answer all the time, and yet with just a little philosophical scrutiny, it's actually not that easy to answer. And yet it gets answered all the time. In fact, even like my toddlers, they would ask this question of other people all the time. It's one of the first things they ask. They would point at people, at strangers in passing and say, Daddy, who's that guy? In fact, my son, Edmund, he's 3 years old, and he just stopped doing this, thank God. But for a time at Mass, he would spend his time, like most toddlers, down in like the netherworlds of the pews, like the shadow realm, where no parents really know what goes on down there or what they get into. But he'd get restless sometimes, and so I would pick him up, and I'd try to calm him down and help him be quiet. And I'd be holding him like this, right? And so he'd be looking backwards, and immediately he would always do this. He would point in the face of the person right behind me, and he'd go, Daddy, who's that guy? And I'd be like, okay, yeah, in the middle of Mass, I really want to have a conversation with a stranger mediated by a 3-year-old. That's not really what I'm interested in. But he wouldn't stop there. He'd go, Daddy, who's that guy? And I'd be like, I don't know, buddy. And he'd go, I don't like that guy. And I'd be like, okay, you just go back to the shadows from whence you came. But again, it's worth noting from the earliest age, this is a question we intuitively ask, and we assume that there should be an answer to it, right? And so why am I asking this question? I'm asking it because you are men, right? You are manly men. You are leaders of your family, of your community, of your church. But you are living in an insane world, which sounds bad, but it's actually the best kind of story to be a part of. It may not be fun all the time. It's going to have adversities and struggles and suffering, but it's an interesting story. If you're like a creative type of person, if you write fiction or you want to write a screenplay or something like that, that's the kind of story you write. You write the story about a normal, sane person who's thrown into an insane world or a world gone mad, where they then either have to become the hero or they fall prey to the designs of the insanity. And there's countless stories that we're all familiar with. Luke Skywalker was a wholesome teenage boy who was living on his uncle's farm, like mining water or something like that. And he was fed up with the mundane pattern of living that he was forced to live with, and he longed for adventure, right? And so that's what eventually happens. He's thrown into this galaxy in conflict, in a galaxy in a world that's just gone insane. Bilbo Baggins was a hobbit who lived a safe and comfortable life. He was the envy of what all hobbits admire the most. And then a wizard knocks on his door and he's taken off on an adventure in a world that has gone mad. Every great story is like that. The modern story tends to reverse that principle and that narrative. The modern story is always about an insane person in a sane world where they create their own adversity because they can't govern their undisciplined delusions or obsessions or passions. Some movies that come to mind for me, which I strongly don't recommend you watch, would be like Whiplash or The Wolf of Wall Street. But you, God willing, are not insane people in a sane world. You are sane people, especially as disciples of the Lord. You are sane people in an insane world. And you are expected to venture out into this world and to be missionaries, to be witnesses for the Lord, to help people get obsessed, as Alex was saying there. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on you to conform to the world as you go out. But St. Paul says this in the Bible. He says in Romans, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Do not conform to the pattern of this world. G.K. Chesterton said something similar. He said that a dead thing can float comfortably down the stream. Only a living thing can stand against that current. So do we want to be living, strong, virtuous men who actually can stand against the currents and the pressures to conform to this world? Because we could do the alternative. We could do the easy thing and just float down the streams of this world and the currents of this world and never have to suffer the accusations from the insanity, from the asylum. We could just join the asylum. But if we did that, would we be happy? Would we be happy if we sold out to the world? Because I want to propose to you that you should be happy people. Again, the characters in those stories, whether it's Luke Skywalker or Bilbo Baggins or Frodo or Harry Potter, if you're into that, or whatever it might be, they suffered in those stories. They faced serious adversity, but they were also the happy ones in those stories. They had moments of joy and friendship and love. It's the villains who, even if they're winning in those stories, they're miserable because of their condition. So I want to propose to you that you should be the happy ones. But in order to do that, it depends on us living well. And in order to live well, we have to be able to answer this fundamental question of who we are. And sadly, too many of us are in the habit of, and we saw this in absurd terms during COVID, of expecting experts to answer this question for us, right? Sorry about that. So the modern world thinks that any important question has to be answered by what? By science, right? But modern science has a very limited scope of inquiry to define anything. It only inquires about what can be observed materially and physically measured empirically, right? But there's a lot more to being a human being, to answering the question, who am I, than just physical observation and the physical phenomena. And again, how do we know that? Well, again, go back to the earlier example. You're more than a body, right? When someone asks you how you're doing, you don't say, body's doing good. How's your body doing, right? you don't refer to your body as yourself. You refer to it as a part of you. When you describe your body, you say, my body, or I have a body. And again, what do the words my and I in those phrases actually mean? They refer to a totality of who you are, of which your body is only a part of. Another analogy to think about this is like, if you wanted to get to know me or somebody else that you find interesting, but maybe you're too shy, you don't want to just go up and approach them, so you want to be subtle about it, you want to ask other people who know them. So if, say you wanted to get to know me, you could ask my doctor, and if he's an unethical doctor, he might tell you all kinds of things about me. He could tell you about my blood work, my weight, my body mass index, about the moles that I need to keep an eye on, and other such things that science can pay attention to. But would that help you get to know me? Or maybe would it make more sense to ask my wife or a close friend of mine who can't really tell you all about the science of me? I hope you would answer that the latter would make a lot more sense, right? So the modern world, so committed to this supremacy of science, has forgotten how to answer this question as well. And that's frustrating for me, because there was a time when educated people could answer this question well. And the reason is because they knew what kinds of follow-up questions to answer to define something or someone. To answer the question who or what something is, they knew they would have to ask what a thing is made of, yes, so that's the scientific question, right? They'd have to figure out what is its material composition. But then they also knew that they'd have to ask, what is it for? What does it do? What is its end? Or what is its purpose? Which is essential to understanding how you or I should interact with the thing in question that we're trying to define. In other words, answering this question well gives us insight into the moral dimension. It influences our behavior with respect to this thing or this person. Because the key to our happiness and our fulfillment depends on us living according to our purpose, our telos, our ends. And therefore living a good life. It means being a good person and making the right kinds of choices at the right time and in the right way. You can think of it kind of like, if this analogy isn't too crude for you, it's sort of like piloting the human machine. You and I are the pilots of our own existence. But if we don't understand what the machine is, what it's for, how it works, we're not going to do a good job of that. If you have friends that work in construction, if they work with heavy machinery, like a backhoe or something like that, you could ask them, like, what would happen if someone who didn't know what they were doing hopped into one of those things and just started pulling levers? I don't even think you do have to ask them. We all know what would happen there, right? The likelihood is that they would damage the machine, they would damage property, they would damage anybody who's dumb enough to be standing around while they're doing it, and they would likely injure themselves in the process, right? Because they don't know what it is, what it's for, or how to use it. Another kind of silly analogy that came to mind for me is, like, what if I had a time machine and I was just bored one day and I got into, like, Craigslist? Craigslist is like the classified ads that you guys use. Is that still the case? Or like Facebook Marketplace or something like that. And I just bought like a beater car that still runs, it operates, but it's cheap and it will satisfy my boredom. And I pack it into my time machine and I go back to like the 1700s to like a colonial village or like somewhere in England or something like that. And I fire it up and I pull out of there and I do a bunch of donuts in the town square. And then I get out and I gesture to the townsfolk, like, this is yours now. I get back in my time machine and I disappear. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think that they're actually going to benefit from this apparent form of leisurely transportation? Probably not, because again, they don't know how to use it. They don't know what it's for. They don't know what its purpose is. The likely scenario is that some of the more sanguine and impulsive people, you know who you are likely, they would get in there and they'd start pushing buttons and playing with the steering wheel. And if they got it going, the unlikely event that they actually got it going, they'd probably crash and hurt some livestock or hurt themselves in the process. So if we're going to operate the human machine, we have to know its purpose again. One way to get at this question is by asking what makes us uniquely human. Like, survey all of creation and all living things. What's unique about human beings? And if you do that, it's pretty obvious. I think like it should reveal itself. It's our ability to reason, right? It's our intellect, our rational conscious minds. So it might be a valid conclusion that we have to live according to reason. I think that that's a pretty strong indication from that first inquiry. And this unique gift that we have, this is exactly what the Christian tradition says, or what it means by the fact that we are created in the image and likeness of God. It's not that we look like him, because he isn't necessarily physical, apart from the incarnation. It's that he is reason itself. He is the source of all reason, and he has created us with this trait of his intact. But what happens when you don't use some ability that you have? A few months ago, I broke this arm, and I broke my other arm when I was like 12 or 13. It was like a 2-week kind of scenario where I just had to recover, and all my friends signed my cast. It was kind of fun. But I do not recommend in your 40s breaking your arm. I was on the couch for like quite a few days. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't lay down or anything. And it's still not fully, it's maybe about 50% healed. And just prior to that, I was feeling good about myself. I was maintaining a pretty healthy physical routine of strength training exercises. And then when I stopped, I fell off that wagon after hurting my arm. I watched it atrophy. It's sort of weird because some of my sleeves or some of my shirts, like this arm will kind of fill out the sleeve okay, and then this one there, it's just sort of baggy. Like this is what happens when we don't use some ability or some strength or some power that we have. Well, the same is true for our minds. If we are routinely, habitually avoiding the use of our reason, the use of our minds, then we will become stupid. We will become irrational, imprudent, and mindless. And I think that's what's happening with the relentless use of our screens. The bishop came up here and talked a little bit about that, and I loved the blessing of the screens. I've never seen that done before. I'm personally grateful that he did that, and I was able to participate in that. But there's, like he said, there's lots of risks and potential evils that come with that. When you sit down and scroll through social media, and this is advice I need to take myself, or when you watch a movie, what are we doing? We're suspending our minds. It's a habit of mindlessness. Like what did we used to call it back in the day when you just say, I'm just going to sit on the couch and get a snack. What did we say? We said, I'm going to veg out, right? Because we're admitting that we're going to embrace the condition of an inanimate vegetable, right? Which is the antithesis of what it means to be a rational creature. This is also, by the way, why it's the best time for advertisers to hit us with their best messaging, because you're in a state of passive mindlessness. You've suspended your critical skepticism, and so messaging that might otherwise sound just ridiculous to you, you're suddenly like, maybe I do need a pair of shoes with wheels on them, or maybe I do need to change my shampoo or something like that. That person in the shower looks so happy right now. Normally, you'd think that's just ridiculous, right? I probably don't have time for this anecdote, but I'll say it really quick if I can. I once listened to this radio documentary about the origin story of advertising, like the whole heritage of it, and it said that prior to the war period, so World Wars I and II, that advertising, like the expression snake oil, it comes from this era of traveling salesmen who would come to town and they'd do these ridiculous pitches that everyone thought was absurd and ludicrous, and everybody saw right through it, right? This was before they had sophisticated media to placate us, to pacify us into this state of mindlessness, where then we wouldn't see through these ridiculous pitches anymore. There's a really, really important principle in all of this, and this was like life-changing for me. And it's the biggest takeaway. I learned about this when I was a young adult, and it's shaped my thinking ever since, which is what you do habitually over and over and over again will change who and what you are. When I was a kid, we obviously didn't have streaming and things like that, and so I had a limited vocabulary of movies that I could watch, or a limited library. And one of them was Rocky IV, and I would just watch it over and over and over again. And I don't know why Rocky at this point in the series decided to get philosophical, but they kept on laboring over this question, can you change? And I think Apollo was the character who was like, you can't change, you have to be what you are. And Rocky was like, no, you can change. And I was like a kid, I was like 8 years old. I was like, why are we talking about this? Get on with the fight. But it's a complicated question. Some people think to themselves, I can't change. I've got these habits. I swear too much. I've tried to stop. I can't do it. I can't stop drinking. I can't stop overeating, whatever it might be. And we want to change, but we're just sort of like, how does this happen? I can't just will it. For example, what would happen if I bounced a basketball for hours a day? I just decided I'm going to do this. I'd be sitting at the dinner table bouncing a basketball. I'd be sitting at my desk. I'd be walking to and from wherever I go, just bouncing a basketball. What would happen in that scenario? I'd go from somebody who is mediocre at basketball, or at least the dribbling portion of basketball, to someone who's really, really good at it, right? This is the nature of practice and education and all of the principles that go behind it. I would change who I am, neurologically, physically, and otherwise. I'd go from a person who can't do that to a person who can. And that's the principle of change that I think we overlook so often. We become our habits. If they're good habits and deliberate habits, they become what's known as virtues. If they're bad habits, they become known as vices. And there's an important distinction there. Virtues only happen on purpose. They rarely happen by accident. Vices always happen by accident. It often happens through neglect. Fitness happens on purpose. Fat happens by accident. I know that's kind of a crude analogy, but I think that sort of drives the point home, right? People who are virtuous are also more free. This is a major paradox that the modern world just doesn't seem to understand. We think that freedom means license to do whatever we want, right? But true freedom actually comes through moral observance. We tend to think of moral rules as restricting our freedom, but the reality is they develop us into virtuous people that can then do more with our lives. Take, again, physical fitness, for example. If some of your buddies, we're close to the Rocky Mountains right now, right? So if one of your buddies calls you up on a particular weekend and said, hey, a bunch of us are getting together, we're going for a hike, we're hiking up a mountain. If you have the virtue of physical fitness because you've been observing your nutrition and a physical routine, you have the freedom in that case to choose, right? But if you don't have that virtue because you've been indulging in the kind of licensed style of freedom that so many people think that they're entitled to, you don't have a choice. You don't have the freedom to go on that excursion with your friends. There's only one answer available to you, which is no, because I wouldn't make it up the mountain, right? In the case of technology, if I spend hours a day in a state of mindlessness, I'm going to become a mindless person through that habit and through that routine. If I scroll TikTok all day, I'm conditioning my mind and my attention span to be shallow and to only be able to concentrate on highly stimulating short portions of content. And if I then try to perform something that requires my focus and my intellectual aptitudes, I'm going to struggle, like studying or working on a work project for a long period of time. It's going to be a struggle for me because I've impaired the virtues that are necessary to do those good things. Now, it's one thing to know about these principles. It's another thing to live it. And the thing is, we make thousands of decisions and actions all day long that all combine and accumulate into this really complicated equation that then becomes the outcome of our lives, either virtues or vices. Which is to say that it's kind of overwhelming. It's kind of complicated. It's almost like we need an instruction manual on how to be a good human being. So what might that look like if it existed? I think it starts by admitting that the human machine, again, if we can use that as an analogy, I don't mean that literally, but the human person is far more complicated than anything we've ever had to define or invent or any sort of technology we've ever used ourselves. And I don't know about you guys, but if you've ever tried to install appliance or bought some piece of technology, the instruction manual that comes with it, the more complicated that technology is, the more complicated the manual is going to be, and the more likely we are to just discard it and start going at it and trying to figure it out on our own, right? So the human machine is far more complicated than anything we've ever used, which means that the instruction manual, if we came with an instruction manual, would be far more complicated than anything that we could really understand comprehensively ourselves, which means that we need a higher intelligence to tell us how to be a good human being. Frankly, we need the one who designed us to tell us how to be a good human being, right? And what does that look like? It's the Bible. It's the church's teachings and tradition. We can't just figure this out on our own. We have to reference that. just blown through my notes here, so sorry, 1 second. Okay, so this is why the church has always had a really simple and sensible answer to the question, who are you? The answer isn't, I'm a wheel in the economic machine, which is what our education system and what our economy thinks that we are. It's what Marxist political historical theory thinks we are. The answer isn't, I'm a consumer, which is what our advertising industry thinks that we are, and our tech industry in cahoots with them think we are. And it isn't, I'm just a physical form, or I'm matter in motion, which is what science thinks we are. The answer to the question, who am I, is, you are a beloved son of God, created in his image and likeness, and with a unique role to play in his kingdom. That's what St. John Henry Newman said. And together, you and God will answer this question and figure out what that unique role is. And your purpose is to know, love, and serve him and your neighbors, and to be happy with him forever in eternal life. And again, it's one thing to know the answer to that question. It's another thing to live it, because the world, the flesh, and the devil are going to use every opportunity they can to distract you from that purpose and that calling as a son of God. So I want to try and give you some practical advice here as I go. Some of this is going to be really obvious to some of you guys, but I know I've met lots of people for whom they've overlooked some of this stuff. So forgive me if this is kind of redundant to things that you're already doing and practicing. The first is, it has got to be prayer. We have to be people of prayer. It's got to be the first thing you do, or at least part of your morning routine, and the last thing you do before you go to bed. And St. Paul tells us that we should be praying constantly throughout the day, right? And that seems probably overwhelming to a lot of us. It's like, oh, I need to get sort of like a prayer program. It doesn't need to be that complicated. The definition of prayer, or the essential feature of prayer, is lifting our hearts and minds to God, which really isn't that complicated. It could just mean throughout your day pausing at certain moments. I've actually got like alarms on my phone for these kinds of habits. It says at like 2 p.m., pray. 3 p.m., do 100 push-ups, and then go back to your desk and continue with your day. Maybe put some alarms on your phone just to sit in silence and contemplate the Lord's goodness. Take a moment to thank him for the good things of your day and all the blessings that he's given you. Take a moment to do an examination of conscience and maybe repent for some of the things that you didn't get quite right. And then just glorify him. Spend time in his presence. And of course, there's the rote prayers and the devotions that we all know. There's the rosary that we've been praying here at the conference. There's the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Creed is a good thing to remind ourselves and to pray in the morning. The next bit of advice, and again, this is advice that I need to take as well, so don't feel bad about this, is that we need to get really very serious about placing healthy limits upon our usage of screens. I've got all kinds of software in our home network that blocks certain websites, like just the time-wasting websites like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and Instagram throughout large portions of the day. We try to turn the internet off after dinner and just spend time together as a family. I don't have a data plan. I can't access the internet unless I'm on Wi-Fi. Whatever you got to do these things, because again, the image of God imprinted upon you is your reason. And if we're distracted by these mindless activities and these habits, then we are not going. It's going to harm us spiritually and mentally and psychologically, and we're likely going to end up being used for somebody else's purpose. And as long as that's going on, we won't be used for God's purposes. Okay, the next thing I want to encourage you to do is to study. Spend time reading intellectual texts, spiritual texts, theological texts, works of apologetics, whatever it might be for you. If what I'm talking about today for you is interesting, you've never heard this concept of habits developing into virtues, this comes originally from primarily Aristotle, who wrote the Nicomachean Ethics. And I would strongly encourage you, if this is piquing your interest and you've never heard this before, or maybe you've heard a little bit about it, but you want to go deeper into it, try reading the Nicomachean Ethics. And I will warn you, it's philosophically dense. There's different translations out there that use language that maybe isn't that familiar to us. So it's going to be a challenge. But think of the things we're willing to do. Think of the challenges that we're willing to face with far less reward. We're willing to go to school in post-secondary or college, university for like 4 to 6 to sometimes 8 years after high school and to have countless sleepless nights and cram sessions and textbooks that we don't understand. We're willing to immerse ourselves in that for what? For career opportunity, which is important enough, don't get me wrong, but how much more important is it for us to be men of virtue, to be happy in our lives, to be free, to have true liberty in our lives? I'd say it's worth trying to take a stab at something like Aristotle's Ethics, as well as St. Thomas Aquinas' his commentary on Aristotle's Ethics, to see how it was assumed within the intellectual tradition of the church. If that's too intimidating for you, a book that I always love to recommend for people who haven't had a lot of experience reading philosophical or theological works, and those two things work together, philosophy and theology. Read philosophy. This is how our formation for our priests work. They learn philosophy first, and then it's like the handmaid of theology, and then they learn that higher form of knowledge in the service of theology. So I recommend starting with philosophy, and if you've never read a philosophical work, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, I can't recommend it enough. I first read that. It was the first kind of book like that I'd ever read, and it was a challenge for me. I'd never read something like that, but it was also still accessible. He originally wrote those as lectures that he gave over to the BBC during World War II. And it's just all the basics of mere Christianity. It's not comprehensive. It doesn't cover a lot of the things that we as Catholics need to know, but it will equip you. And for me, it opened up a whole aptitude of understanding. I never thought of myself as a smart person. I didn't do that well in high school and that kind of thing. And it opened up a whole aptitude for me of an intellectual range and a horizon that I didn't know existed for me. And it convinced me to keep on looking and to keep going down and reading texts like that. So give it a shot. I dare you to meet that challenge. And if you've already read it, keep going. Keep reading other authors like Chesterton and the Church Fathers and the Doctors of the Church. Okay, next is work on habits, not resolutions. This is the biggest trick that so many people in our modern world seem to be stuck in. We make these grand resolutions, these ambitious resolutions at like New Year's, right? But then we don't know how to actually achieve them, because the thing we should be committing to is a habit, is a routine. Virtue comes through the process of virtue ethics, again, as defined by Aristotle and the church's tradition. And again, physical fitness is the proof. It's the tangible scientific proof of this. If I want to get big biceps and a six-pack, I can't just say to myself, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do that. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way. You can't just change yourself by just closing your eyes and mustering up whatever willpower you can. But you can, there is a decision that's available to you that is the path to change, which is tomorrow, work out for even 15 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, do a workout. It's not going to cost you that much. And then do it again the next day, and then the next day, and then the next day, and then the next day. Develop that routine, develop that habit, and then it will become a stable disposition, which is the church's definition for what a virtue is. And all virtues are like that. Practice courage, practice prudence, practice justice, practice temperance, practice restraining your appetite, limiting your appetite. That's what produces the virtue of temperance. Lastly, take your vocation seriously. And I'm going to stay in my lane here. I can't talk about the religious or the clerical vocation. I'm a married man with children, so I'll talk about that. Your vocation is the means by which God sanctifies you and the means by which he teaches you to love. Because love, we can all think of ourselves as loving people, but it doesn't cost us anything. We can have nice ideas about people that we never have to interact with and that never make us uncomfortable. But marriage and parenthood will make you uncomfortable. They will stretch the limits of your ability to love. And in my experience, it went beyond my ability and beyond my limits. And those were moments where I had to repent, I had to regroup, I had to ask God for forgiveness and the grace to rise to that challenge, because it's still there for me the next day. I can't retreat from that. And so by his grace, he will give you the help that you need, and then he'll stretch your limits again every single day. It's like a boot camp of love. So embrace that process. Be grateful for your spouse and your children, especially when they frustrate you and they annoy you. That is the means of your sanctification. And pray for them every day. Don't ever forget to pray for your spouse and your children. And if you aren't married yet, Start praying for that as well. Pray for your future spouse and pray for the grace you need to become the person who is going to be ready and willing to take on the challenge of that vocation. Okay, so that's all I have for you today. I hope that was helpful for you guys. God bless you, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you.
All right, so